guys, I am coming to you this week with a tip that will transform your art practice. This tip is for artists either that are more on the designer side, like pattern designers, or fine artists, or really any kind of artist you can imagine. So this tip was inspired by an email that I received from pattern designer Barbell Dressler. Those of you that don't know her, Barbell, aka Bear Bell, is a pattern designer that focuses on historical pattern making practices. She has a lot of lessons on Skillshare, and she's also been featured within the immersion course by Bonnie Christine, which is also a course focused on pattern designers. So unfortunately, I deleted the original email that I received from Bear Bell, but this email that she sent was actually kind of haunting me for several weeks, and I just couldn't get it out of my mind. So I really wanted to share it with you. At the end of this episode, once I'm done sharing the tip, I will give you the latest updates from the studio, so stick around if you want to hear them. Okay, so the tip I'm going to discuss is what I call the power of 5. I don't remember exactly what Bear Bell calls it, but I'm gonna call it the power of 5. And the example that I'm going to use is, say you want to create a pattern for a spoonflower design challenge. But as I said, this can be any kind of art project that you are intending to create. So what do I mean by the power of 5? So say you want to create a design for a spoonflower design challenge. You have the general idea of the pattern or artwork you want to create. What she suggests that you do is first create 5 different ideas for how you want to execute this challenge. So these might be 5 different topical ideas, 5 different compositions, maybe 5 different color palettes. Come up with 5 different ideas. So most of us probably do this, right? When we're conceiving of a concept for a design, we don't just come up with one concept, we come up with at least a couple. But she challenges us to stretch it all the way to 5. Now, the power of 5 does not end here. It is not just about coming up with 5 different ideas for a concept. After you've come up with those 5 different ideas, then from there, we can either try to execute all 5 ideas, or for my version of this, we're just going to, at that point, pick our favorite from these 5 designs and go from there. So now let's say you've picked your favorite of the 5 designs, and we're talking a pattern here. So let's say it's a motif and we've decided it's going to be arranged maybe in just a kind of a scatter arrangement. So from that, you're going to want to sketch the motifs that go into that design, which may be anywhere from maybe 5 motifs if it's as simple as design to maybe 20 or more motifs. Now here's where it gets a little harder. She says for every motif, you want to then sketch 5 different versions of that individual motif. And let's say we're doing a toile de jouy, which are one of those intricate patterns with a little scene, and we have 5 little scenes. She suggests taking each part of that scene, so let's say there's a dog and a house, and doing 5 different versions of each of those. Or maybe if it's just abstract line work, we're going to do a circle, but we do 5 different versions of that circle, and then we have a square or a cube, and we have 5 different versions of that. And then once you've done 5 different versions of each of your 15 to 20 motifs, or 5 or whatever, then you can pick the best ones from there. Now, it can keep going on pretty infinitely, because let's say you're doing an animal and you do 5 different versions, but they each have eyes, and maybe you want to do 5 different versions of those eyes, and then you select a color palette. She encourages you, don't just stop at the first color palette for those designs. Try 5 different versions of that color palette. So this email I got was kind of haunting me, because I have a tendency to maybe do about 3 different versions of the general pattern, and sometimes then I just get into it and I do one motif at a time, and as long as I like that motif, I move to the next one. I have definitely before taken my time to try a couple of different versions, but I definitely am guilty of not doing 5 different versions times 5 different versions times 5 different versions. And even though since I read that email, I have still been guilty of doing this, I have found that even when I said, okay, let me do 3 different versions of each thing, you know what? That pattern was so much better. And I can only imagine how much better it would get if I stretched myself and did 5 different versions. So I'm not saying that this is an easy technique to employ, but if you really want to take your art to the next level, if you really want to go from amateur to professional, and she is definitely a professional, then I would suggest at least giving this technique a try. I was gonna say you really can't go wrong, but I mean, it will take you a lot more time. I said in my last episode that I really wanted to challenge myself to at least do 1 spoonflower design entry in this next month, as I've been recovering, as you can maybe hear from my voice, from being a little sick. And so this weekend I started with 1 concept, and I just wanted to sketch it out. And I didn't even get done sketching out the first version because I already had about 30 motifs within this. This was a really complicated motif. And in the end, it didn't actually go with one of the design challenges. It was sort of a Halloween-y idea that I got in my head. But as I started doing this, and I need to put at least maybe 10 more motifs to fill it in, just sketch version, I thought, you know, how good would this pattern be if for each of those motifs that I did attempt 5 different versions? And this is without attempting even 5 different versions of the concept. So I'm thinking I'm going to try. But if I try, there is no way with my current schedule that I'm even getting this 1 pattern done within a month, because for me to sit down and do, you know, as I said, I don't know, there's probably at least, once I finish it, at least 30 images within this design. If I do, that's 150 drawings. And then once that, how many different color palettes, and that's not including any kind of refining of any of those ideas. That is just going to take me forever. So, you know, folks, I don't know if I have it in me. And I sit here and wonder, is that why I am where I am with my art career and not even further? And that might be the case. And so I just need to be upfront with you guys that sometimes we know what it takes to get to the next level and we're still not doing it. And that could be for a number of reasons. And I don't know if the solution is to then just stop and not do anything. I don't think that's the case. So I want to create a balance. You know, I might, as I said, try to do the power of 3 or at least the power of 2, because I definitely want to make my art better. But at the same time, I know mentally that if it takes me a year to get 1 pattern, and let's say that pattern completely flops and don't really like the outcome, that's going to really discourage me and get me off my momentum. So I might create some smaller, simpler patterns and then keep working on this 1 and try to do at least the power of 3. And I will have to say that this reminds me a lot of something that international artist Elizabeth Jenkins was talking about in our interview here. And she's a fine artist, and I was asking her how she improved her art so much over the course of the last couple of years, from when I was first seeing her post her portraits until more recently. And she talked about iterations, and as I said, this is for, and she's a fine artist. And she talked about iteration. She told me that the portraits she does are not the first version of that portrait she does. Sometimes she does several different versions of the same exact subject, the same exact portrait. And that's how she gets herself better. So when I saw this email from Bearbell and I thought about it in the context of what Elizabeth Jenkins had said, it really started me thinking that I do need to spend more time repeating the same idea, repeating it, digging for gold, refining my patterns to bring them to the next level, as well as the same thing for my fine art, not to just stop. And I don't know what that means for the pieces I do that involve stitching, because I can't imagine, hand stitching these giant pieces and then just hand stitching it over again 5 times. And especially when you use collage, you use up those materials. So once you've done it, you've sort of done it. And there's this part of me that says, each piece is almost like an iteration. So maybe you do 5 pieces and one of them ends up a gem. That was kind of my working assumption for my art for a long time. Like, instead of kind of working on one piece and refining each piece over and over again, I just thought, well, let me create, 10 pieces, 100 pieces, and maybe one of those pieces will be a gem, or 10 of those pieces will be a gem. So there's something to be said for both ideas, whether you just create to the end and then start again and create to the end, which is what I had been doing, and this idea of kind of reworking each little part of the piece, which I think, I have to admit, is really sometimes what you need to do to get to the next level. And sometimes it really is quality over quantity, because if you create 100 pieces and one of those is sort of a winner, that's not necessarily a better use of time than spending, the same amount of time, but just creating one beautiful finished piece. So that's my tip of the week. I hope you find it useful. I'd really like to know what your thoughts are on iterations, and how many different versions of patterns or artworks do you do? Please let me know in the comments. But before you go, I promise you the latest updates from the studio. And I touched on this a little, but in the last month, I did some traveling. I traveled out to LA with my daughter for the opening of Domestic Detritus, where I had 10 of my stitched fine art pieces in a show. It was fabulous. It was, I have to say, my favorite exhibition that I've been a part of to date. And it is still on view until the end of March at Brea Gallery. So if you are in the LA area, you can go see that. I also got a piece accepted into the Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester, which is the museum I went to growing up as a kid. So that's huge. And then in more recent news, as I said, I started working on a pattern that kind of ended up being more of like a Halloween pattern than any of the challenges. But if it takes me all the time I think it's going to take me, then it's a good thing I'm getting a head start on that. And then I finished a little 5-piece mini collection for a Spoonflower color collaboration I'm a part of. There's a Facebook group, and it's a bunch of artists on Spoonflower that choose a color palette and a topic, and then people are invited to create collections around it. And then it's sort of a collective action to promote those related pieces. They can complement each other because they all have the same color palette. Apart from that, I am just in the beginning phases on a fine art series that I want to combine my pattern making work with my fine art. The loose theme here is sort of Rust Belt life, sort of kind of the Rust Belt area. As most of you know who are subscribers, I am now here in Buffalo, New York, and it's really been sucking me in and charming me. I've been getting to know the local art scene. I went to BICA, which is the Buffalo Institute of Contemporary Art, this week. And it's a really cool space. It's in sort of an old brick industrial building, and Buffalo is full of these old industrial buildings, and I am a big fan of the gritty. So it's really sucking me in here, and I am sort of in the initial phases into working into a new series that sort of pays homage to the Rust Belt, but it's very loosely formed. And at the same time, I am also, because I've decided I think I want to stay here a little longer, looking for a more permanent residence/studio space for the next maybe couple of years. I don't know, I could still change my mind, but I have been looking for that space because this Airbnb is great, but it's a little cramped. It is fine for doing my pattern making, but especially with my 10-month-old daughter, very close to walking. When I start to do the sewing, painting, collaging stuff, there is no way to make it safe and to keep that out of the way. There's just not enough space. So I need to find something with a little more space for the next couple of years if I'm going to be here. And so that is what I have been up to. If you are still watching, thank you so much, you super fan. If it's your first time joining, I'm Aurora B. On this channel, I discuss all things creative, including what works for me and what doesn't in my journey as an artist, turning a passion into a burgeoning career. If you like that kind of thing, please consider subscribing and please hit the like button or the dislike button if you don't like that kind of thing. And until next time, keep creating.